I'm Ryan O'Doud, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks on the Issues Magazine YouTube channel. Today we're continuing with The Psychic Bible, the apocryphal scriptures of Genesis P-Orridge and the third mind of the Temple of Psychic Youth. Now we're continuing with segment 1-8, Define Control 5. An open letter. To that ignorant and confused part of humanity not yet aware of magic and nature, or the importance of them becoming integrated as soon as possible for the survival of the human race. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Every man is a woman, every woman is a man, every man and woman is a star. Nature slowly decays is something you hear quite often. Well, it isn't really so. Nature always evolves, always develops in directions given by the components and forces within it. Nature and the earth will always exist, be it even in forms of burnt-out lands and hordes of cockroaches. The statement, man's nature slowly decays, is closer to the truth. Our environment that we need to live and regenerate in is decaying. There isn't one single person who can deny this today. It's a sad fact, but even sadder still is the fact that there are people actually opposing human development. There are people violently struggling for their own security and wealth, believing that this will save them, and that that's the only thing that matters. Well, pardon me if I laugh at you dying of cancer and spit merrily on your graves. You are despicable and such cowards that you won't even share your dead bodies with the earth, but put them inside wooden and metal coffins to protect them. From what? What are children taught in school? How to act and behave in a clockwork structure working in a destructive downward spiral. Be good and you're welcome to heaven. Sacrifice yourself for the greater good. God knows best. He's omnipotent. You're small and worthless. Just be good and everything will be all right. This is feeble, sickly, and most importantly, unnatural morality that we should all help to eradicate. It has no value or justification today, when we should all work together for the restoration of our essential Mother Earth. There is no God but man. Omnipotency comes from actions that alter the surroundings, mental and physical. If those actions are destructive, for instance, dumping toxic waste into the sea, you'll be sure to get what's coming to you, cancer as a result of toxic groundwater. If those actions are good, for instance, planting trees and flowers, you'll get immediate result. There will be more oxygen in the air. You are the judge as you are God. Christianity and its fellow criminal religions, Islam and Judaism, exist today merely as vehicles of control, merely as modes of thought to keep people from acting and thinking themselves. Judaism equals Christianity equals Islam equals communism equals capitalism, etc., and so on, ad infinitum, ad nauseum. Just different words denoting the very same unnatural perversion and illness, which is the fact that you are not free. When they realize that times and morality have changed, and this time not in their favor, they become afraid, like small children who start to scream because their mother says no, although they are very well able to express themselves. They become ultra-paranoid in need of extreme polarities, a black and white way of regarding the world. And there is violence and death, as always in times of change. 2,000 years ago, there was the Roman Empire succumbing to Christianity in times of war and civil war. And today, the 23rd Pope arrives at Stockholm in the 23rd week of 1989, saluting the Swedish Catholics, mere thousands, a piss in the ocean, and praying for peace in the world. At the very same time, there is a potential civil war in China where communist soldiers kill students who think freedom lies in a red and white soft drink can. There are train crashes and pipelines exploding in Russia, corruption having a higher priority than public safety. A religious leader dies and falls out of his coffin into the hands of millions of insecure and thereby fanatical followers. Yes, pray on, old fool, because you may very well need it. There is no Christianity anymore. Sweden has never been a Christian country. You failed, you are failures, and you are so aggressively neurotic because you know it's true. Scandinavian mythology has always lived on. Through the times of your oppression and contemptuous misunderstanding of nature and its fantastic forces. The runes are part of the Scandinavian DNA structure. Pagan activities have never died, not anywhere, and today it's all coming back to you. A magical appreciation of history and life in the work for all people's common future. Theirs is a good definition of a free person, and that's one who is completely honest with himself in every situation, and who is thereby working for the procreation of womankind. The honesty becomes the medium. The work is the goal itself. Love is the law, love under will. Carl Abramson, The Temple of Psychic Use, Scandinavia, 1989, Era Vulgaris Maximus. And there is a section break. Language, a wordless song. As an outlaw group of individuals who are together because we share a thought, a feeling, an association with one another by choice, we must search for the purest expression of that thought and use it as a common denominator for freedom. Freedom of speech, of love, of will, of roles for ourselves and for all the oppressed in our society. It seems rare that even a few of us escape the powers and controls of society and its peer groups and holders of vested interests. In previous writings and articles published in our monthly documents, control and the trick of time have been touched upon. The latter we interpret as the false security given to us, often projected as lethargy, by illusory notions of the future and tomorrow, precepts endlessly exploited by all manner of politicians. To understand the powers and controls of society, we must try to understand our society in its purest and impurest forms. How does it control? What are the steps of and to control? Many steps and methods are obvious. One is dress, fashion, and style. This medium of control has now taken over the bias and purse strings of our own culture, music and acts of celebration. Some try to rebel against the easily defined areas in obvious ways. They feel that to dress in filthy clothes and be filthy is proof of being radical and is true rebellion in itself against the filth of our society and its Masonic capitalism. Yet there is nothing easier than to neglect ourselves, knowing it's a simple way to offend our parents, little old ladies, and inherited status quo behavior. Yet if society has defined acceptability, then to refute it by being its opposite is to accept the original definition. Society wills us to feel no love for ourselves, to hate, to compete, to give up, and to be submissive, not proud. Young people have become an oppressed minority, just as blacks and other ethnic minorities have. They are political refugees in their own society. To raise up the banner of apathy and surrender and convince ourselves it is a revolution is an laughable non-threat to those who wish us dead. Dead in brain, if not in body. So how do we rebel? How do we stand up to society with its latent fascism? And how do we remove the latent fascism that must have infected us all as products of its conditioning? This is a question with an easy first answer. We rebel and fight. But how do we recognize effective rebellion as opposed to symbolic rebellion? How do we develop our own positive reconstruction from this deconstruction? There's more than meets even the third eye in the game's tricks and territories. We must pinpoint again how society runs, who sets it up, and what its ingredients are. Language, a songless speech. Language is crucial. We judge and measure so much by it, yet language, to those who can articulate and manipulate it, is merely a game in itself, a word game, played to make their position stronger, to mask their greedy intentions. For those of us less fortunate, who are awkward and clumsy with their words, though our hearts and minds are clearly enough, we are at their mercy, left to be used and abused. Words to us are foreign. We vibrate to emotions and songs of freedom. The cold accuracy of professionals confuses and controls us against our will, tries to make us servants. We don't want their dictionary or their diction full of words that oppress, that humiliate and control. They use those words to protect their own, their jargon a secretive Morse code aimed at maintaining their privilege and social power. Therefore, the first step is for us to understand this common denominator language, this prime medium of control. It is powerful, it breaks trusts. It may hurt and kill, it most certainly can control us. So to break down society, we must break down the ingredients, break down the abilities and methods of the people who communicate through language only to control and confuse. To be even able to dream of changing society in the tenacious grasp of these people, we must change language, its forms and patterns. Chop it up, jumble it around, see what it really does, really says, expose it, reveal its strength, its weakness. We must change the language of promises, contracts, manifestos, advertisements, deputations, mandates, formulas, boundaries, expectations, hopes, treaties, wars, education, and justice. People cannot live with a language of right and wrong, black and white, either or. It does not reflect reality or life or how each of us really feels and thinks day to day. Language as it stands is designed to result in conflict, and at that moment, those who control language step in as experts and control us. Language has to be common to everyone, and to become the language has to be reassessed. Culture has to show people techniques for breaking down the apparent logic of language that follows a line to a conclusion and develops forms that reflect infinite parallel answers and possibilities, a kaleidoscope with no fixed points or conclusions, and therefore describes far more accurately how life feels and how unsure each moment of life can feel, how little can really be planned for or counted on. But is this all fictitious, idealist rubbish? Or is it possible? Can we see ourselves communicating with our feelings, our intuitions, our emotions, our dreams through a pure, deep love for each other and what we feel could be and should be allowed to try to be? Or have the powers that be so tightly twisted us around their fingers, injecting us with hate, ridicule, cynicism, and fear, that we are all their robots, falling for all their endless games and sadism, seeing our neighbor as an enemy, accepting that nothing can change, asking what the point is, looking out for number one, despising those who try, needing to be accepted, insecure, guilt-ridden, angry, where love should be, forever damaging our children, forever willing victims, forever seeing dreams as nightmares and nightmares as normality, fighting each other with paranoid intensity instead of those despicable feudal lords that sit smug in the building by the water. No wonder they think we are pathetic scum, fighting what's easiest and nearest to us, ourselves and our kind instead of them. The building they occupy to symbolize their freedom can just as easily be their prison. The best weapon, the best defense is that which turns your attacker's own energy upon themselves. Language can be reassembled every day in a different way to help free us. Our tiny concrete cages can be our palaces, and their palaces can be their cages. The key is what you say. The key is what you say. The key is the key is the key is the key is what you say is what you say. The key is the key. The key is what you say. The key is. Collie 5 and Genesis P-Orridge, London, September 23rd, 1987. And there's a section break. Define human main. We are but serfs wearing the emblazoned shield of a shoe. The essential structure of our consuming Western society is still feudal. Only the names have been changed to protect the guilty. In Britain, huge estates, whole islands, are still owned by the descendants of ruthless invaders and murderers who were paid off for their support in political intrigues and genocides hundreds of years ago. The church and the lords were paid in the land of those killed for it, was cheaper than gold, and could always be stolen again, and given away as a reward for treachery as often as the pursuit of supremacy dictated. Those mere indigenous mortals living on the land, drawing forth its riches in food or minerals, had no part to play in all this, unless a few symbolic mutilated bodies were required by the grandiose lord owners. They were tenants, they were serfs, they were to all intents and purposes slaves. Today, whatever day this is, 19th century, 20th century, 21st century, nothing has changed. Most of the population are merely seen as a naturally occurring resource like coal, oil, water, that can be drawn upon for self-perpetuation and self-aggrandizement by the present lord owners who have vested interest in the administration of control and status quo. The disadvantage of a population seen this way is that they are costly to maintain, to keep in working order, and to program to the particular skills required by control. Worst of all, they occasionally remember they are human beings, with a right to enlightenment and actually dare to challenge this primitive situation. Define human being. A human being that has, in conscious process of thought, seen themselves as individual and capable of growth beyond the parameters they have inherited as finite from any given social environment. The E stands for enlightenment, evolution, energy, ecstasy, equilibrium, etc. Now, in the agrarian ages, these population resources were useful as farm laborers. They needed knowledge of the land, butter, little education, and robust health supplied by natural selection. The weak died. During the Industrial Revolutions, these same population resources needed modification. So we see education, health, housing supplied to ensure an expanding supply of suitably equipped and useful raw materials. Now, reprogramming is again in full force. Control no longer needs healthy, semi-educated, numerically large, and pacified resources. In fact, they use up far too much food, space, medicine, and time. So our dear feudal lords who do the obvious and run down the services so magnanimously supplied before. These lords see themselves as superior, separate, chosen to administer control, and make no mistake, in their heart of hearts they would rather be rid, once and for all, of we inferior and outmoded, useless populations. It would be so simple to administer this world if there were hardly any people, and those that were quiet, programmed infotechs. But no one controls control anymore. It has a parasitic and debilitating life of its own. Certain very select groups have merely inherited the almost priest-like role of its protection and nurturing, even at the expense of complete extermination of this human race, many with no remembrance of which came first. Control replicates and expands inexorably in a manner quite exactly like a malignant tumor, or to use a current example, like HIV. Control affects individual aspirations and potential, our sense of unity and freedom. Our social and ideological compassion is precisely the same hidden and terminal manner that those diseases debilitate and destroy our physical bodies. Control is very much a virus of the spirit. It works like HIV, diluting our immunity to conditioning and programming. The joys, hopes, dreams, visions of childhood are broken down, reducing our abilities to convince and aspire beyond the physical manifestation of life. We become victims of a dull immobility imposed on us by this invisible debilitation until we die in spirit long before our bodies pass on. Time is the key to the perception of this process. Control, cancer, and HIV work through time. They are linear problems. Their destructiveness accelerates at an ever-increasing rate until the termination of the host. Control needs time also. It hides in social structures like politics, religion, education, technological medicine, mass media, the family, sexuality, and computers. Just like a virus, even like DNA, it exists for its own sake. It relies upon a certain element of cohesion, the belief in a rational order, the inviolate right to a never-ending human history, to an acceptance of inherited values and measurements. Control relies upon manipulation of human behavior. In a word, it relies upon hopelessness. Science now suspects that DNA does not exist in order to perpetuate us, but rather we exist in order to perpetuate DNA. That once we have reproduced or failed to reproduce, thus sending a modified DNA module forward in time, or being unsuitable vehicles for this function, that this is the moment when our aging process really begins, for the DNA has no further use for our physically manifested host bodies. DNA moves infinitely more effectively through a time continuum than we do, without any need for reference to the outside universe of society, with its petty and pathetic concerns based on a belief in our own absolute immortality against which we measure everything. In a conversation with William S. Burroughs in Duke Street, London in 1972, we discussed cum aspects of control. More importantly, we concluded that the most critical question of this era would be, how do we short-circuit control? We have both chosen different aspects of an under-the-counter culture, as he dubbed it. Culture in its widest application, inclusive of behavior, ritual, exploration of consciousness, style, art, music, expression of the mind, a process of reminding ourself. It seems to me that culture is an expression of states of mind rooted in the effects of behavioral conditioning that begins during gestation, not at the moment of birth. These states of mind become a reflection of states of tribe. In other words, the conditioned self is intended to be a microcosm of the state, whether that be anthropologically an enclosed tribal unit in the rainforest, or an amorphous collection on a grand scale like Western country or the Soviet Union. Everything is molecular in structure, both at the nano level or a galactic level. There is good reason to assume that virus-like interactions can thus be applied on any scale. If we can release a chaotic virus into the host state of tribe society, then over a period of time, the various component cell structures of that host state of tribe could break down, short-circuiting its synapses in the form, for example, of literature, politics, television's peer group acceptance. If we see DNA as a language, a carrier of information, then we also view culture as a modification of language that we are also able to read. Culture can thus reveal, describe, measure, and expose control making, the virus of control of the host, and the interactions of consciousness that are one environment, the virus. Control can, from this position, be short-circuited. Short-circuited by radical cultural thought and actions, not by isolated actions, but by a sum total of integrated imagination, mind, consciousness, enlightenment, and communication, pointing in every direction of travel simultaneously. This medium culture is what we once called art, until it was so corrupted and emasculated that association with its contemporary conglomerate is cause for shame, not pride. If the aim is less than to become free from physical existence, less than comfortable coexistence with our planet, less than an achievement of infinite consciousness, then it is not art, only decoration or diversion. Intention is the key. Evolution towards being human beings. The system of and then, we find peace, balance, compassion, and then we become dematerialized consciousness, able to diffuse outside the space limitations of our physically manifested bodies. No longer a single mentality, the conception of individual changes. Just as cells cluster yet are made up of individual cells, so our mentality will become clusters, and memories and information will diffuse without boundaries. What we conceive of now as an individual could spread throughout and beyond time and space, and then we become as supra beings, and then. Editor's note, I'm going to repeat that. What we conceive of now as an individual could spread throughout and beyond time and space, and then we become as super beings, and then. Like the search for HIV, once identified and isolated, the character of control with its invasion of macro and micro clusters of molecular life becomes visible. Our search within is for methods to break these preconceptions, modes of unthinking acceptance, expectations, filial obligations, unnatural clusters and states of tribe, and constructed behavioral patterns that make us as organisms so vulnerable to control. In our efforts to step outside time in order to escape this process, we deconstruct to reconstruct. We retain our inherited concept of what we are told is reality, and then we discard all concepts and definitions irrevocably and constantly reaching a stage of non-thinking, not doing. By applying a nonlinear, fragmenting process to every aspect of perception, reality, society, domesticity, behavior, philosophy, ideology, and morality, it is possible to modify and confound control and wrench away from its manipulation of behavior, mind, and body the triad through which it violates self-respect. We intend to do damage to the primary tools of control, guilt, and fear, operating within the same media as control. We intend to synthesize a system to challenge, decay, and render impotent the virus itself, neutralizing it, starving it of hosts, not just through music, through writing, or through the products of expression, but by gathering together a loose-knit but compassionate lost tribe, an experimental society that exists to detoxify the behavioral immune system, restoring balance, to detoxify the poisoning of the blood of Earth, restoring balance, to detoxify information, restoring the possibility of infinity. We intend to form a base of cooperations that integrates where control disintegrates. A method is a systemic application of the fragmenting process to all modes of inherited belief and behavior and information processing on a scale that will affect events within and without space-time. An intention is reclamation of self-determination, reminding oneself and self-description by a truly free choice. A restored immune system, an end to physical manifestation. A result is a neutralization of and challenge to the center of control, a tribal state replacing state of tribe. Genesis P-Orridge, 1985. Short-circuit control. The following prepared verbal text is constructed from various aspects of the central tenets involved in the structure that is the Temple of Psychic Youth. Whilst it is hoped that in what follows many aspects of the temple will be intimated upon, it is in no way a definition of the organization. By its very nature and continuing existence, the temple avoids all temporal-based definition, which serves only to suffocate in place in past time, a state that would leave it at the mercy of the very forces against which it fights. It is not an academic body seeking knowledge in the commonly accepted sense, but rather one in which its ideas, aims, and practices are in a constant state of flux, thus as accurately as possible reflecting the state of the individual minds and bodies which make up its complex and expanding information research network. Inextricably linked with this is the virus of language, a linear concept that would have us accept reality as a single path from one point to another. The individual is left with hopelessness. All of control's practices are against him. The entire present social structure, politics, religion, mass media, the nuclear family, and its monogamy. Control relies upon the manipulation of human behavior. This control circuit can be short-circuited. Control needs to impose a linear time on its subjects. This is achieved through cultural means, through story, where a beginning, middle, and end follow each other without any ambiguity. This is how control wishes reality to seem, and yet the individual is in a constant and programmed state of flux. There is no fixed point, no definition, no finite answer or specific formula. A major way to short-circuit control and its linear language virus is a means of the cut-up, a technique developed largely by Brian Gysin but explored by William S. Burroughs and others. This technique gives us the closest possible means of describing existence as it is, a kaleidoscope containing implicitly every possibility, every impossibility, every unconscious and conscious thought, words, and deeds simultaneously. Life is quite simply a stream of cut-up on every level. No one event occurs singly to be followed by another, but rather exists in the conscious and unconscious with different interpretations at the same time, as a multitude of similar events that take place throughout existence. There are a multitude of examples to illustrate this, from the memory instinctively comparing past situations with those of the present, through to metabolic functions occurring in the body, affecting the entire mental process of the being. The cut-up is a way to identify and short-circuit control, life being a stream of cut-ups on every level. There are means to describe and reveal reality in the multifaceted individual from which reality is generated. Control denies intuition and instinct particularly, and dreams of all forms, randomness, thought. Quite obviously, it is possible to believe more is possible than control's social programming has inculcated us to accept. Behavioral and psychological perceptions generate impulses to question and to refuse accepted notions. Nothing need be accepted until it has been analyzed and its value evaluated for applicability to the individual. Skepticism is not destructive but dissolvent, further revealing the control process. The temple of psychic youth is the last and ultimate refuge of the skeptical and critical mind. Once control has been identified and the struggle against it is part of the individual's very being, there is still much to be worked upon. All significant truths are private truths, despite the intense pressure from control that would compel us to think and behave as if this were not so. That which is aimed for with effort, struggle, and dedication can be set up in the very center of the individual, the absolute. Thought and reality, will and feeling come together in a sublime whole, which could be called the absolute. We exist in a world made up of appearances which partake of the absolute without fully containing or representing it. So it is primarily through our individual experiences, and to a lesser extent through appearances, that we could begin to have any knowledge of the absolute. Since all forms of knowledge and experience are continual and relative, the only way of reaching towards the absolute is by a steady enlargement of our knowledge and a continual search for system unity and coherence within ourselves. The shattering and divisive nature of ordinary thought and experience forced upon us by social control, you can't understand me, can only be healed if placed within the search for an ever-increasing unity. The impossibility of discovering any objective meaning in even the most significant patterns of human behavior is not the dreadful situation it at first appears, but in fact opens up an abyss into which any of us may fall, that of subjective meaning. Meaning exists in human activities collectively only if those who participate in such activities wish or believe them to have meaning. The truth of such things is relative. Hence the confusion in quite deliberately contrived myths which to the outsider surround the rituals of the Temple of Psychic Youth. No ritual can be properly interpreted, nor need it be provided it functions for the participants, because the common values and sense of fact are anticipated in a quite different system of belief. A control society based on the exploitation of life draws its energy from ever-present fear. It appears in the final analysis that the only fear to ever haunt us is the fundamental fear of enjoying ourselves. Control is very good at condemning happiness to the idea of a wheel of inconsistent fortune. That to appropriate it would seem to break the wheel itself. In every exchange with control, one loses oneself, realizing, or at least attempting to, all one's long and short-term desires, exacerbates the terror control would have cling to pleasure, its price stamped in invisible ink. The ultimate absurdity has now been reached, now that we are pressed to feel guilty about feeling guilty, when we could in principle get rid of the very idea of error. In one aspect, guilt stems from the fundamental lack of respect an individual feels for themselves in an exchange with another of like mind and aims. This is a suffering stemming from what is cynically presented as a fault we committed. Doing exactly what you feel like is pleasure's greatest weapon. Connecting individual acts with collective practice makes up a psychic power which beats deep within the temple of psychic youth. A pleasure curbed is a pleasure lost. All pleasure is creative if it avoids exchange with control. Loving what pleases us, we have to build a space in life as little exposed to pollution by the business of control as possible, or we will not find the strength to bring the old world down, and its fungus will grow amongst us and not in our dreams. Intense pleasure means the end of exchange in all of its forms. Taking hold of one's own life will open up an era of universal self-management, which is one of the multitudinous aims and realizations of the Temple of Psychic Youth. Nothing that has gone before in this text is a theory. Life itself mocks the most wonderful theories. Only from pleasures torn in audacity and laughter, which ring out at orders and laws and limits, it will fall upon all who still judge, repress, calculate, and govern with the innocence of a child. One of the most insidious aspects of control is Christianity. Christianity and its myriad doctrines that teach sex is sinful when not fenced in with myriad restrictions. Sex constitutes one of the greatest threats and problems to governments and rulers, those who seek to control control, because the ruling class are more than dimly aware that the sexual element has an obscure, to them, connection with individual creative potential and self-awareness. If allowed to manifest, this potential inevitably asserts its sovereignty and refuses to comply with the artificial standards of morality designed to enslave it. By enslavement, potent factors include the institution of monogamy, supposedly enforced by marriage, and the introduction of sex-related diseases. The sex instinct is blocked on a massive scale. It forms a reservoir of energy which rulers and priests are able to drain in order to bolster their positions in society and the state. Thus, self-interested codifiers of their laws, by suppressing the free manifestation of the sexual impulse, automatically benefit by the restrictions they impose on the masses. The collapse of this form of restriction is one of the uppermost aims of the Temple of Psychic Youth, and it will result in the total disruption of social structure and civilization. Editor's note, that's quite a grand ambition. Continuing. We now see the vast ocean of pent-up energy beginning to burst and overflow its dams on all sides. Mental diseases, nervous disturbances engendered by the artificiality of life under control domination are swelling to immense proportions. Because the rituals of the Temple of Psychic Youth imply the total freeing of sex from the conventional preordained usage propagated by control, it creates an immediate resistance in the mind, unprepared for any form of self-growth and disciplined responsibility. The essence of the Temple of Psychic Youth is that magic integrates while control disintegrates. The idea is to apply the cut-up principle to behavior. The method is a contemporary, non-mystical interpretation of magic. The aim is reclamation of self-determination, conscious and unconscious by the individual. The result is to neutralize and challenge the essence of social control. The individual is the ultimate reality and the greatest power. Brother Malik, April-May 1987. And there is a section break. Oh, squalid mind. The squalid mentality that would rather keep the world and their leaders as a miserable, neurotic, paranoid, twisted, destructive, and scared zone, where the language of trivial insult and prejudice is used to deflect and ridicule both the sincerely motivated project and the public interest in it, where the last thing desired is to actually think. They don't want you to think, to have choice, to learn, or to investigate. A world full of possibilities terrifies them. They have a vested interest in appearing to be arbiters of taste, well-informed and intelligent. In reality, they are jealous, self-seeking, emotional cripples who survive in their job by the perpetuation of lies and distortion by use of arrogance and banality. They are as inaccurate, vindictive, ignorant, and mercenary as the worst of the gutter press they would be the first to deride. They feed on misery and confusion to perpetuate their power. They bolster a corrupt establishment that is a parasite on creativity, disinterested in real thought or experiment. They exist to continue to exist, bitter that for all their bombast and camouflage, they are just second-rate lackeys reliant upon moronic businessmen and promo departments and opiate showbiz music fed like papa to an infantile public who are deflected from any more substantial fodder into which to sink their teeth. So many people expect some truth and objectivity, some accurate and fair information. So many are given the opposite under a veneer of radical thought. They think you are stupid, that they are necessary to indicate to you what you should think and discuss, should check out. Their vicious and destructive bitterness, their journalistic cruelty and sarcasm, comes from their inner knowledge that they are dispensable trivia parasites. A legacy of distorted prejudice remains. The capacity to hate is a frightening human reality. We are always ready to blame another if the circumstance can free us from our own self-guilt. Genesis P-Orridge. And the section concludes with a picture of the Temple of Psychic Youth Triple Cross. Editor's note. There are several pictures in this work, and I can't display them, probably for copyright reasons. But you should check out the book itself, and if possible, even purchase a copy, because I do believe the magical sigilizing throughout the work is intended to amplify, we'll say, the effects of the words themselves. So this concludes Section 1.8 of the Psychic Bible. Tomorrow we will continue with Section 1.9, Magic Defends Itself 6.